She signed the papers. He picked up a button, and every phone in that room went off at once. Let me tell you how it started. Not in a church, not with flowers, not with a single person's blessing. In the dirtiest government office in the city. Fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Old carpet smell hanging in the air like something that had given up. A woman in a Vera Wang wedding dress, price tag still swinging from the inside seam, standing next to a man in an oil-stained jacket. That's how it started. The clerk looked up from the papers, swallowed hard. "Are you sure?" Her voice trembled, the way a screen door trembles in a storm. Not broken, just very close to it. Rose Harrington gripped the pen until her knuckles went white. Behind her, quiet laughter moved through the crowd. A woman in a yellow cardigan leaned to her neighbor. "She's completely lost it." A man in a rumpled blazer. What exactly did they threaten her with? Her father leaned in close. Zane Harrington, 62 years old, silver-haired, voice like a vault closing. "6 weeks," he said, very quietly. 6 weeks and we lose everything. Do you want to see your parents out on the street?" She said nothing. She looked straight ahead, at the man standing on the other side of the clerk's desk. Atlas Kane was tall, 6 feet, the kind of build that comes from actual work, not a gym. Long black hair that needed a trim, light stubble, sun-browned skin, a dark jacket with a faint oil stain near the left pocket, boots that had clearly walked a long way to get here. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He wasn't looking at Zane. He was looking at her. Calm, unreadable, steady. The way a man looks when he has already made his decision and finished second-guessing it days ago. The clerk slid the papers across the desk. Atlas picked up the pen. And then, every phone in that room vibrated at once. Every single one. The sound moved through the crowd like a wave. People flinched, reached into pockets, stared at screens. Rose heard someone gasp, then another. She watched faces go pale, then confused, then alarmed. Harrington Capital stock had just surged 47% in 43 seconds. The room erupted, voices overlapping, questions flying. Is that real? How does that happen? Who triggered it? Rose did not look at her phone. She looked at Atlas. His jaw was calm. His hand was steady. He signed his name in one clean, unhurried motion, like a man who had been waiting for this exact moment and had no reason to rush it. And then something small happened, the kind of small thing that gets forgotten by dinner time, except that it didn't. One of the tiny pearl buttons from the back of Rose's dress had come loose sometime in the past hour. She hadn't noticed. It had rolled across the linoleum and come to rest near Atlas's boot. He bent down, picked it up, wiped it gently against his jacket, the way you'd wipe a smudge from a child's cheek. Then he turned and placed it quietly in Rose's open palm. He didn't say a word. The entire room went still, not polite quiet, stunned quiet, the kind that falls when something happens that people don't have a category for. Like watching a hummingbird hang perfectly still in a summer garden and realizing, only after a moment, that you've been holding your breath. Rose stood there with that small pearl button in her palm, price tag still swinging from her dress, stock notifications still lighting up every phone around her. She didn't know, not yet, that Atlas Kane had purchased Harrington Capital's largest debt position 2 full weeks before this morning, quietly, anonymously. Timed to the minute, he had engineered every detail of this day, and the one thing no spreadsheet could account for, the single variable outside every calculation, was the way Rose's expression changed when she looked down at that button in her palm. Something shifted in her face, just slightly, like a window, cracked open for the first time in a very long, cold season. The clerk stamped the papers. The fluorescent light buzzed on. In the back of the room, a woman who had come in only to notarize a lease quietly pressed her sleeve to the corner of her eye. She would tell her neighbor Betty it was her contact lens. Betty, who had known her for 30 years, would not believe a word of it. Rose Harrington was now Rose Kane. She had absolutely no idea what that would come to mean. what she would discover in the weeks ahead. Starting with a little girl in a solar system shirt and a library book about creatures that live without light, would change everything she thought she understood about wealth, about kindness, about what a real family is actually built from. If your family pushed you into a situation like this, would you have signed? Drop your answer in the comments, yes or no. The house had a green front door, not a bold, confident green, not the kind you'd see on a home magazine cover, a soft, faded green, like the color of a gardening glove left out through 2 summers and 1 hard winter. The kind of green that says, someone loved this house once, and still does. Wind chimes hung from the porch eave, pieces of driftwood and sea glass, strung together with fishing line. They made a sound like something gentle and unhurried. Rose stood on the cracked front walk with 1 leather overnight bag and the strangest feeling that she had boarded the wrong bus and arrived at someone else's life entirely. The door swung open before she could knock. A small girl came flying down the porch steps, 8 years old, curly black hair, wide, curious eyes, wearing a shirt printed with the solar system and carrying, of all things, a library book about deep-sea creatures, 3 post-it notes bristling from its pages like little flags. "Are you staying here for real?" the girl demanded. "Like, for good? Do you need to see my room first? Because I organized it by biome." Rose blinked. "By biome? Dad says it's unusual," she shrugged, entirely unbothered. "Dad also says unusual is fine." This was Ruby Kane. Atlas had said almost nothing about her on the drive from the courthouse. He had driven with both hands on the wheel, radio off, window cracked 2 inches, letting the silence sit between them without filling it. No small talk, no apologies, no explanations dressed up as comfort. Rose had found it maddening. She still did. But watching this small girl with the biome-organized bedroom, she understood, for just a moment, why a man might choose his words very carefully around someone worth protecting. The first week was the strangest Rose had ever lived through. Stranger than the day she'd been named CEO at 31. Stranger even than that Tuesday in London when the fire alarm went off mid-earnings call and she'd finished the last 4 slides in the stairwell while the building cleared out around her. Atlas woke every morning at 5:30. She knew because she heard the coffee maker from down the hall, a gurgling, determined old machine that sounded as though it took each cup personally. By the time she came downstairs, breakfast was already on the table. Eggs, wheat toast, orange juice. No note, no ceremony. He had simply made food for the household, the way her late neighbor Ed used to salt the sidewalk every winter morning without mentioning it and without waiting to be thanked. One morning she found her Italian heels sitting by the door, the good ones, cognac-colored, badly scuffed on the courthouse steps. The scratches were gone, not polished over, repaired. The leather was smooth, the color even all the way across. She turned them over twice, checked both soles. She didn't ask him about it. She wasn't entirely sure why. Evenings, Ruby talked about anglerfish, the ones that carry their own light in the pitch dark of the deep ocean. About the Mariana Trench, which she described in the careful, reverent tone that some children say for bedtime prayers. About how the giant squid wasn't even confirmed on film until 2004. Which meant, she pointed out with great solemnity, that science was still guessing about a great many things. Maybe science hasn't discovered everything yet, Atlas told her one evening, not looking up from the soup he was stirring. Ruby considered this. That's either comforting or terrifying. Most true things are both, he said. Rose was standing in the kitchen doorway with a glass of water she'd come to refill. She stood there a few extra seconds, then went back to her room. She replayed that exchange in her head for the rest of the night and could not fully explain why. It was a gray January afternoon, the kind that makes the whole world feel like a watercolor left out in the weather. When Rose noticed the textbook, open on the kitchen table, thick, gray-spined, serious, Advanced Derivatives Pricing and Risk Management, 4th edition. Not a book you stumbled across, the kind of book you sought out deliberately. There were handwritten notes in the margins, in Atlas's clean, careful script. Rose set her coffee down, looked at the oil-stained jacket hanging by the door, then back at the book, and felt the particular unease of someone whose numbers have stopped adding up. She began paying closer attention. That same week, she stood in the hallway outside the kitchen and listened to Atlas walk Ruby through a calculus concept using a distributor cap and a paper napkin as his only tools. He didn't simplify, he translated, the way a person translates a language they grew up speaking. Ruby looked up from the napkin. "Why do you know this formula, Dad?" "A beat, just a small one. Saw it on TV," he said, "easy and light." And folded the napkin and got up to check the stove. Rose pressed her back flat against the hallway wall. Her heart was doing something she didn't have a name for yet. On a rainy Thursday, she watched through the front window as Atlas helped their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Adler, push a flat-tired bicycle up the wet sidewalk. He walked her all the way to her porch, fixed the tire with a kit from his jacket pocket, and when she reached for her purse, he shook his head. "It's cold today," he said. "Please just get inside and rest." Mrs. Adler took his hand in both of hers, the way older women hold a hand when something has genuinely moved them. "You are the kindest person I have ever met," she said. Atlas nodded once, pocketed the kit, and walked back to his truck. Rose stood at the cold glass for a moment longer than she needed to. Something warm moved through her, quiet and unfamiliar, like a room you'd forgotten was in the house. That same week, Harrington Capital came under pressure. A rival businessman named Damian Blackwood had begun quietly acquiring shares, circling the company with the patience of someone who had done this before and enjoyed it. Rose was working around the clock, fielding calls, holding the structure together through sheer will. One night she sat on the bathroom floor and cried. Not dramatically, just the small, exhausted kind of crying that happens when a person has been holding everything for too long and simply runs out of hands. Atlas stood outside the door for 15 minutes. He did not knock, did not call her name. When Rose finally opened the door, a glass of warm milk sat on the floor beside a folded note in plain, unhurried handwriting. "You don't have to talk." She sat down in the hallway with her back against the wall and held that note in both hands, while the kind of tears came that feel more like relief than grief. She thought about what kind of man understands that silence, offered at the right moment, is its own form of care. This man, she thought, is not who he appears to be. And she had absolutely no idea yet how right she was, or what she was about to find out. She hired a research firm in February, not through Harrington Capital's channels, privately, through a contact in London who asked no questions and delivered fast. She gave them one instruction: find everything there is to know about Atlas Kane. What came back 12 days later was a file 41 pages long. Rose read it twice, standing at her home desk at 11 at night, a cup of coffee going cold somewhere around page 18. She didn't notice. The file told her this: 10 years ago, before the oil-stained jacket and the driftwood wind chimes and the 5:30 coffee, Atlas Kane had been the founding CEO of Meridian Capital Partners, a private investment fund that had, at its peak, managed over $3 billion in assets. He had been, by every account, a quiet genius. Not the loud kind that fills rooms and needs to be photographed. The kind that changes things slowly and permanently and doesn't leave a forwarding address. He had disappeared completely. 10 years ago, after his business partner of 15 years, a man he had trusted as a brother, and his then-wife had worked together to strip the fund from him. In the aftermath, accounts were restructured, paper trails rerouted. Atlas had walked away from nearly everything he had built, and then he had simply vanished. Into a house with a green front door, a coffee maker that took things personally, and a daughter who was 2 years old and needed a real life more than she needed a billionaire for a father. Rose closed the file. She sat down on the edge of the chair. She thought about Ruby, a baby when this happened. He had made this choice when Ruby was still learning to walk. He had looked at $3 billion and chosen this instead. She sat there in the quiet for a long time. The Hartwell Gala was the following week, the kind of event where the flower arrangements cost more than most people's rent, and everyone wore their ambitions on the outside of their clothes. Damian Blackwood was there, of course, moving through the ballroom the way certain men do at these events, slowly, deliberately, taking up space as a statement. When he spotted Atlas, who had come in a jacket that was clean but not expensive, because Atlas did not own an expensive jacket and had apparently made peace with that long ago. Damian smiled, the way people smile when they are preparing to be unkind. "Well," he said, loud enough for the surrounding cluster to hear clearly, "is that the mechanic? Driving your wife around these days?" The room shifted. A dozen heads turned. Rose felt something ignite in her chest, fast and clean, like a match struck in a dry room. She stepped forward before she'd finished deciding to. "He is my husband." Her voice was quiet and controlled, the voice she used in boardrooms when she was entirely done being polite. "If you'd like to be invited back next year, I'd keep that in mind." Damian's smile flickered. Just slightly, just enough. Atlas said nothing. He stood with his hands easy at his sides, looking at Damian with the particular calm of a man who has nothing whatsoever to prove and has known it for years. That was the night Rose learned the difference between performing power and having it. The Global Capital Forum took place on a Thursday in March, a downtown hotel, marble floors, floral arrangements that towered over the registration tables like small forests. Rose had arrived early for a panel and was reviewing notes at a back table when the afternoon keynote was announced. She looked up. Atlas was walking to the podium, not in the familiar jacket, in a dark, well-cut suit, understated, the kind that doesn't announce itself, hair pulled back. He moved to the front of the room and stood there. And 400 finance professionals, fund managers, senior analysts went completely, genuinely quiet. He spoke for 40 minutes. Global capital flow patterns, emerging market vulnerabilities, long-term sovereign debt restructuring. He spoke without notes, answered questions with the same unhurried precision he used to explain calculus on a kitchen napkin. And at no point in those 40 minutes did the room make a sound that wasn't intentional. Rose sat at the back table with her hands folded in her lap and did not move. Afterward, in the corridor, Atlas found her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in that small government office on the morning they married. Steady, calm, already certain of something she was only beginning to understand. "I wanted to tell you," he said, "but I had to know Ruby was safe first." Rose said nothing. She was still recalibrating. He took a quiet breath. "I left all of it when she was 2 years old. Every account, every fund, every connection. Because I wanted her to grow up in a world where she was just a kid, where nobody looked at her and saw a number." He paused. "Money can acquire almost anything. It cannot buy the way Ruby looks up from her book in the morning and says good." Rose looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around him. Not carefully, not tentatively, but the way you hold something you have only just realized you almost missed entirely. Her face against his shoulder, and she said, very quietly, "You were steady with me from the very first day, even when I gave you no reason to be." He stood very still, like a man who had waited a long time for something and was being careful not to move, in case it disappeared. There was one more detail, small, characteristically unannounced. On the drive home from the forum, Rose checked the charitable giving records of the Harrington Foundation, something she had accessed dozens of times over the years. One anonymous donor had been contributing consistently, quietly, for the past 4 years. Every quarter. No name attached, no recognition sought. The routing information, when she traced it carefully, led back to a private account she now recognized. Atlas had been donating to her own family's foundation, all along, without telling a soul. She closed her laptop and looked out the car window at the passing streetlights. She thought about the repaired shoes, the warm milk, the button wiped clean, and now this. Generosity that didn't need a receipt, that existed entirely without an audience. The truest kind. She was beginning to understand. The kind that never needed to be seen to be real. After the gala, Atlas had gone home, hung the dark suit in the back of the closet, put on his old jacket. The next morning he was in the driveway at 7 with the hood of the neighbor's truck up, same as any other Saturday. Rose watched from the kitchen window. She thought, I still don't fully know this man. Then she thought, but I am beginning to. What she couldn't have known was that Damian Blackwood had also been watching, and that he had just decided it was time to stop playing carefully. Damian Blackwood was not a man who accepted a loss quietly. He was the kind who, when a deal fell through, looked around for someone to make pay for it. And when Rose had stepped forward at the gala and said, "He is my husband," with the quiet conviction of someone who fully meant it, Damian had filed that moment away, with the patience of a man who collects grievances the way others collect receipts. In April, he chose his moment. He started with rumors. He was very skilled at rumors, the kind that don't need proof because they travel faster than proof ever could. The whisper spreading through certain circles went like this. Rose Harrington's marriage was a financial transaction from the start. A business arrangement dressed in wedding clothes. The whole thing was theater, and everyone involved knew it. The calls began on a Tuesday. Shareholders, board members, 2 journalists Rose had known for years, who now asked their questions with a new, careful distance. The sound of people who are already preparing to step back from something they think might fall. Rose sat at the kitchen table, her home office now, the one that smelled like Atlas's 5:30 coffee every morning, and looked at the list of names she needed to call back. She thought about her father's voice the first time he sat her down and explained what it would mean to inherit the company. She had been 12. She had carried it alone ever since. But something was different this time. Something had shifted in the architecture of how she faced hard things. She called Thomas Whitfield first. Old money. Old loyalty. The kind of man who had sent her a birthday card every single year of her adult life. Always with a handwritten note inside. The ink slightly uneven from the arthritis that had been creeping into his right hand since his late 60s. She told him the truth. Not the Harrington Capital version. Not the version her father would have approved. Her version, clear, direct, without theater. She offered him a straightforward arrangement to protect his portfolio. In exchange for his continued support, Thomas listened. Then he said simply, "I'll be at the Thursday meeting." She hung up and sat very still for a moment. Atlas appeared in the doorway. He looked at her, just a glance, reading the room the way he always did, quietly and accurately. "Do you need backup?" he asked. "No," she said. He nodded and he stayed in the kitchen. It was, she realized, the most genuinely respectful thing anyone had ever done for her in a professional moment. Not offering to fix it, not stepping in front of it, just asking, accepting her answer, and trusting her. Damian called her cell at 6:45 on a Wednesday evening. She was driving home from her 3rd meeting of the day, the late April light doing something golden through the overpass girders. She answered because she already knew what it was going to be. His voice was smooth and unhurried, cold water smooth. He told her he had documentation, communications between her father and Atlas's attorneys going back 14 months, in the right hands, framed the right way. It would read as a straightforward financial transaction with a legal ceremony attached. He told her that if she did not step back from her opposition to his board position, he would release everything. He paused to let it land. Rose's voice was not entirely steady when she spoke. It trembled, just slightly. The way a voice does when something is genuinely hard and you are holding it anyway. "I'm not afraid of losing my reputation," she said. A pause on the line. "I'm afraid of losing the person who looked at me with patience and steadiness when I had given him every reason not to." Silence. She ended the call. The story Damian released was picked up by 2 financial blogs and 1 second-tier business publication. By Thursday, 3 larger outlets had issued corrections. Thomas Whitfield had, it appeared, made a few quiet calls of his own, By Friday, the story had the lifespan of a soap bubble, briefly visible, then gone without a trace. Damian Blackwood did not appear at the next board meeting. He sent an attorney in his place. Rose drove home through a neighborhood where someone was grilling on a back porch. She could smell it through the cracked window. That particular April smell of charcoal and new grass. From somewhere 2 yards over, the faint sound of a radio playing something old and familiar. She stopped at a stretch of road where a woman was selling wildflowers from a red wagon. A hand-painted sign that said, "Bouquets, $5. A mason jar for the money on the honor system." Rose bought the last bouquet, yellow and white, wrapped in newspaper. She put them on the kitchen table when she got home. Atlas was already there. He looked at the flowers, then at her. She said, "I've been thinking about what you showed me." Not in a speech, just every single day. The small things. She paused. "That's the kind of person I want to be." He was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed the kitchen and held her. Not carefully or tentatively, but fully, the way you hold someone you have chosen. The wind chimes on the porch shifted in the evening air. In the living room, Ruby had fallen asleep on the couch with her deep-sea book open on her chest. One hand curled beneath her cheek. The solar system stretched across her small shoulders like a map of everywhere she had yet to explore. The house was very quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind that feels earned. But none of them knew yet that the most difficult moment was still ahead. That it would not arrive from a boardroom or a press release. It would arrive on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, in the most ordinary and most frightening way that anything ever arrives. It would come for Ruby, and it would force Atlas to make the one choice he had spent 10 years doing everything in his power to avoid. By May, Rose had moved her office home for good. She had told herself it was temporary, just for the quarter, just until things settled. But she found that she liked working at the big pine kitchen table, with the old coffee maker doing its laboring best in the background, and Ruby 2 feet away muttering about plate tectonics and the internal temperatures of volcanoes. The Harrington Capitol Tower downtown had corner windows and a view of the whole city. It had never once felt like this. Atlas still went to the garage 3 days a week. Why? Rose asked him one morning in late May. She meant it genuinely. No edge, no challenge, just wanting to understand. He was quiet for a moment, pouring coffee into his chipped Bassmaster's mug. The one so faded the fish was mostly a suggestion. "I like fixing real things," he said. She thought about that for the rest of the morning. The call from Zane came on a Thursday evening. Rose was on the porch when her phone lit up with her father's name. She brought it inside and handed it to Atlas without a word. He took it, listened. His face stayed composed. It almost always did, but she noticed his jaw soften, in the particular way it did when Ruby surprised him with something. When he set the phone down, he was quiet for a moment. 8 years ago, he said, there was an accident on Route 9. A driver ran a red light and hit a sedan head-on. The man in the sedan lost consciousness trying to reach the shoulder. He looked at the table. I was 2 cars back. I pulled over and stayed with him until the ambulance arrived. Rose went very still. The man in the sedan was your father. She sat down. I'd been on a job. My face was covered, helmet on. He never saw me clearly. Atlas glanced at her. He never knew. Outside, the neighbor's sprinklers started up. That quiet suburban percussion of a summer evening beginning. Somewhere down the block, a screen door opened and closed. Zane Harrington was not a man easily moved. Rose had spent 34 years watching him make decisions the way others play chess, without sentiment, without residue. But something in his voice during that call, something she couldn't name exactly, had sounded like a man who had been genuinely humbled. He had called to say he was sorry. She let that sit with her for a while. The news about Ruby came on a Tuesday afternoon. Rose was in a meeting when her phone overrode the silent setting, the school's number. Atlas had quietly added it to her bypass list the week she moved in, without explaining why. She took it in the hallway. A parent volunteer at school pickup had noticed an unfamiliar car parked along Ruby's usual walking route on multiple consecutive afternoons. The school had flagged it and notified the families. No contact had been made. Ruby was safe and inside. Rose's voice was steady on the phone. Her hands were not. Atlas heard the change in her tone from the kitchen. He was in his car in 4 minutes. What unfolded over the following 24 hours? The calls he made, the doors that opened at the sound of his name, the swift response from people who had apparently been waiting a decade for him to need something, made unmistakably clear to Rose exactly what she had married. Not the mechanic who fixed her shoes without mentioning it, not even the hidden billionaire, the man who, when his daughter needed protecting, would dismantle every wall he had carefully built around his own life without pausing to count the cost. By Wednesday morning, the matter had been fully reported to the proper authorities. Damian Blackwood's name appeared in the resulting documentation. By Thursday, he had resigned from the board entirely. Through a brief attorney's statement that said as little as the law allowed, the press statement was Rose's idea. Atlas hadn't asked for it. He never would have. That was, she had come to understand, exactly the point of him. She stood at the podium in a simple navy blazer. Not the severe power dressing of her Harrington Capital days, but something quieter. The way a person stands who has decided to take up only exactly as much space as they need. A reporter asked the direct question, was this marriage a financial arrangement from the beginning? Rose took a breath. I didn't marry a billionaire, she said. The room was absolutely still. I married a man who fixed something of mine without telling me, who left a note outside a closed door that said you don't have to talk, who showed me, one small act at a time, what it looks like to move through the world with genuine steadiness. She paused. The rest is just numbers, and the numbers were never the point. She looked at her father, seated in the second row, his silver hair, his hands folded in his lap, the face that had always looked, to her, like a man running calculations. It did not look like that today. You arranged this marriage to preserve the company, she said, her voice catching only slightly. But I stayed because this man showed me who I wanted to become. He taught me that the only currency that never loses its value is how you treat the person in front of you. Zane sat very still. For the first time in Rose's memory, he looked like a father. Not a chairman, not a strategist, a father. And that evening, in the soft rain outside the garage, the three of them stood together, and Ruby asked the question that said everything none of the adults had yet found the words for. It rained that evening, not a dramatic rain, no thunder, no lightning, just the soft, steady kind that turns the world quiet and close. The kind that makes a neighborhood feel like it has pulled a curtain around itself for a little while. Atlas was standing outside the garage when Rose found him, his face turned slightly upward, unbothered by the rain entirely. The way a man stands when he has spent a great many evenings exactly like this, and found them perfectly fine. Ruby came running out behind Rose and her socks, one of them the deep-sea one with the anglerfish on the ankle, which she would absolutely hear about once they were back inside. She flung both arms around her father's waist. He caught her without looking down. The automatic, weightless reflex of a parent whose whole body knows where their child is at every moment. He looked at Rose over the top of Ruby's head. She looked back at him. He opened one arm, and she walked into it. The three of them stood in the rain outside the garage. No words, no ceremony, just the rain. And the driftwood wind chimes turning slowly on the porch. And somewhere down the block, a dog barking twice and then going quiet. Even if I lost everything else, Atlas said, quietly, into Ruby's curls, I'd still have the two of you. He paused, and that has always been everything. Rose closed her eyes. Something that had been wound tightly inside her chest for a very long time. Something she'd been carrying since she was 12 years old and first learned that love and responsibility lived on separate ledgers. Let go. Not all at once. Not with any drama. Just let go. The way ice does in the very first warmth of an early March afternoon. The final morning was a Sunday in June. Rose was at the kitchen window with her coffee, the good kind she'd started buying, the kind worth waking up for. Watching a cardinal work its way through the hedgerow when she heard Atlas come downstairs. He was carrying something, a watch, a Rolex, slim, classic, the kind that cost more than most people's cars. She had never seen it before. He had kept it in a drawer. She understood now. Every single day she had known him. He set it on the counter. Then he clasped on his old Casio, the scratched one with the cracked bezel, the one that told time in 3 zones for reasons she had never asked about, and snapped it without looking down. Poured his coffee into the Bassmaster's mug. Sat at the kitchen table with his newspaper. Ordinary Sunday. Everything exactly as it always was. Rose watched him for a moment. Then she crossed the kitchen and sat down across from him. "The morning of the wedding," she said. "I thought that was the day my life ended, the life I had built." He looked up. "I was right," she said. "It did." A beat of quiet between them. "But I found something I didn't know I was missing." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The hand with the scratched Casio and the calluses and the trace of oil under the thumbnail that never quite washed all the way out. "I choose you," she said. "Not for what you have, for who you are." He looked at her for a moment, steady and certain. The same look he had given her in that grimy government office on the morning that had started all of this. Then he turned his hand over and held hers. Ruby appeared in the doorway in her solar system shirt. Hair wild from sleep, one sock on, deep-sea book already in hand at 7:45 on a Sunday morning. She looked at them. She looked at their joined hands. She looked at the Rolex on the counter and the Casio on her father's wrist. "Dad," she said carefully, "this time our family isn't fake anymore, right?" Atlas laughed, a real one, the kind that came up from somewhere deep and caught even him off guard. "No, Bug," he said, "it's not fake anymore." Ruby nodded, fully satisfied, and opened her book to the page about anglerfish, the ones that carry their own light through the deepest, darkest water in the world, where no sun has ever reached. This story teaches us something quiet and specific, the kind of thing a good neighbor might say over decaf on a Wednesday morning, not the kind you'd find printed on a wall calendar. Atlas never announced his kindness, he just did it. The shoes, the warm milk, the button. None of it asked for anything back. And here is what that means for the rest of us. Practically speaking, this week, think of one person in your life who has been carrying something heavy. A daughter stretched thin between work and her own kids. A neighbor who hasn't put her porch light on in 3 days. A grandchild who called last month and you haven't called back yet. Don't send a card. Don't wait until you have the right words. Do one small, specific thing. Drop off a covered dish. Sit on their steps for 20 minutes. Write their name at the top of a blank page and finish the sentence, "The thing I most want them to know is..." You don't need $3 billion to change someone's day. You never did. The people who shaped your life most deeply, think about them honestly. They probably weren't the ones with the most to give. They were the ones who showed up anyway, quietly, and stayed. Thank you for spending this time with Rose, Atlas, and Ruby. If their story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or something you've been holding, or a kindness you once received and never quite forgot, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration. Written by a human with AI's assistance. This story exists to spread one simple belief: kindness is never wasted, and no matter how long the darkness lasts, life always keeps its warmest rays of light, waiting only for us to believe, to be kind, and to keep moving forward.